Welcome everyone, welcome aboard. Today we are going to discuss about the fourth chapter in history, which is tribals, Dikus, and the vision of golden age. So this is the name of the topic, and we would be discussing the same at length today. So the major concepts in this particular chapter are the traditional occupations of the tribals of India. How did their lifestyle change under the British Raj or under colonialism? Effects of the changes, the conditions of the tribal chieftains. What is Jum cultivation? How did they survive then? And what problems they had in the survival during the British era is majorly the topic that we're going to look at today. So these are the learning outcomes. So we will be able to understand a few major tribal groups in India. We will be able to describe the major occupations that the tribal groups of India had. And we will also discuss the plight or the condition of the tribal people under the British rule. And then we will also talk about the struggle that tribal communities had to do in order to get over the problems they had. And today's hero is going to be Birsa Munda. We're going to discuss about him at length. And we are also going to look at other tribes. So there are some difficult terms that come in this particular topic or this particular chapter. The term the first is sleeper, which means a horizontal plank. So if you can see this, that is lying between the two rail platforms, the horizontal line that lies between the two railway platforms, that is called a sleeper. Then we also talk about beaver. Beaver is also a term used for shifting cultivation. What is shifting cultivation? We'll discuss that at length. We have a special slide over that. And then we have fallow. Fallow land means a land which is not cultivated currently. It is kept on hold, you can say. We are not cultivating anything currently. And maybe after a few years, we will again start cultivating on that once the soil comes back to its original fertility level. Then we have mahua. Mahua is a flower that is used to make alcohol or is used as medicines in some cases. Then we have Vaishnav. Vaishnav means the worshippers of Vishnu. Sal, as you can see in the picture, it is a type of a tree. Next we have Dikus. This term has come very often in the chapter. Dikus means someone coming from the outside. So, for example, we stay in Pune, right? Somebody coming outside Pune, somebody coming from Delhi, or somebody coming from some outside Maharashtra will be a Diku for us. A Diku is mostly the outsider, foreigner. They in this chapter we're referring Dikus as the money lenders or the foreign officials who exploited the tribal. The next term is broadcasting, which means scattering seeds in shifting cultivation. It's a way of sowing seeds. So instead of going and bending down and sowing seeds, they used to scatter the seeds, which is called as broadcasting. Then we talk about zoom cultivation. Yes, this is a topic that we have to discuss in length. Zoom cultivation has actually three names. One is shifting cultivation, four names rather: shifting cultivation, Bevar, slash and burn method, or zoom cultivation. Everything means the same. Okay, so what does this mean? Wherein now, when we are talking about tribals, they basically did farming into forest lands, right? There were no ready-made agricultural lands for them, so they had to prepare the forest for cultivation. Now, how did they do that? They literally cut down the trees, more than half of the trees, only the trunks of the trees were left. And whatever the remains after cutting, they used to burn those cuttings. Okay, if you can see in this picture that I have shown here, this picture. So the remains were burnt up, okay, and then the ash was left on the soil itself. So that ash particularly worked as a fertilizer for that particular land. And so once this land is ready and fertilized, we use it. So the tribals basically use it for cultivation for 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years later, the fertility of the soil obviously decreases, and so they leave this land fallow and move to another forest, move to another area in the forest where again they do slash and burn method, or as you call zoom cultivation, or shifting agriculture, or bevar. So all these terms mean the same. Then plantation. Plantation is something where an estate or a property on which crops such as coffee, sugar, tobacco are grown. And Sardar, we all know what Sardar means in Hindi. Sardar means the leader of the group. Okay, this is a small activity. You can pause the video after a while and match these following. So, which is plantation, which is fallow land, which is a sleeper. You can match it. You can pause the video and match it. Next, we move to the general introduction of the topic. These were some of the difficult terms that we discussed right now. Now we are going to move to the topics. So, what are some tribal groups in India? So, in Himachal Pradesh, we have the Gaddis. One Gujars are in the Himachal Pradesh again. So, one Gujars are in Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir and Gujarat. Then we have Bhotlas in Uttarakhand, Sahriyas and Bhils of Rajasthan, Banjaras of the Deccan. You can see I have the map here. I have plotted them on the map. You can pause and take a look at all the tribes that we would be having in that we have in India as such. Then this is a small description of all the tribes that we have. You may want to pause and look and read about the tribes. Then we have Bhils. They are in the Rajasthan. So this word Bhil is actually derived from Bhillu, which means a bow, from bow and arrow. Okay, then we have the Santhals. Santhals are in the state of Bengal, Bihar, and Jharkhand. Then we have the Gonds. The Gonds are in the central India. So if you see, we have Gonds in Madhya Pradesh and central India. Then we have the One Gujars. As I told you, One Gujars are mostly found in Gujarat, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh as well. Then we have Banjaras. Banjaras are found basically, Banjaras are also called as Lamani and or Varnacharis in Sanskrit, and they are basically found in Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh. They are Telugu speaking people basically. Then we have the Khasis. The Khasi people are indigenous ethnic group of Meghalaya and Assam. So where do we find these people? We find it in Meghalaya and Assam. Then Santhalis and Jewaras. These are basically far, far away from us. They are in Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So if you see the map, you will be able to easily locate them. Okay, these are some of the questions that you may want to solve later. So now basically we'll talk about what are the occupations of the tribals. As I said, they were jhum cultivators. Now we've already discussed what is jhum cultivation. So jhum cultivation is nothing but slash and burn method, which means what they do is they clear the forest area by burning the forest, cutting the trees first and then burning the remains. So this is what it says. They cut the trees and burn them. They spread the ash on the land, which would then act as a fertilizer. So they supply potash to fertilize the soil. They broadcast the seeds in every place and dug it with a hoe. So broadcast, which means I already discussed, it is spreading the or scattering the seeds. That is called broadcasting. This is a very important term. You might want to remember it. And they dug it with a hoe and then they broadcast the seeds. Sorry, with the soil. When the soil has lost its first fertility, what will they do? They will fallow this land. They will leave this land and move to another area in the forest, which they will again clear by cutting the trees and spreading the ash. So this basically is called as a slash and burn method or jhum cultivation. The other occupations apart from agriculture were hunters and gatherers. So if you're talking about forest lands, these people basically hunt for animals and then they gather fruits, roots, and other important stuff that we get from the plants. So what did they collect? They collected fruits, roots, nuts, cooked them for meals, all that stuff. They extracted oil from sal and mahua seeds and used for cooking. So basically, they were also very good at understanding and identifying the medicinal properties of the herbs and shrubs found in that area. So they were a wonderful source of information and knowledge for us. Then we come to mahua tree. The mahua flower is edible, which means we can eat that flower, and it's a very important food item for the tribals. They use it for many purposes, medicinal purposes also. They are fermented and they produce alcoholic drinks like mahua. And tribal men and women during celebrations usually consume mahua. Then the other occupation, as we talked about, hunterers and gatherers, were what they gathered were the weavers and leather workers brought dye. Now, how did they make dye? They extracted it from kusum and palash flowers. Now, they had to gather palash and kusum flowers so that they could make the dye, and that is why they are fall under the hunters and gatherers category as well. Commodities in exchange of forest products. Sometimes they use cash from the poor earnings of for buying the local products. Now, not everybody was engaged into agriculture. So, if one group is engaged in weaving and producing leather goods. What they used to do, whatever produce they got from there, they used it, whatever cash or whatever money they earned from that, they used it for earning the local products or for buying the wheat, rice, or whatever was the staple food there. Some of them did odd jobs in villages, carrying loads or building roads, so that they earn some labor and are able to fill up their stomach. Now, if you can see, this is the kusum flower. This is the kusum flower. This is the palash flower. Palash is nothing more like a gulmohar actually. Then this is a laborer in the plantation fields, and these are some of the people building up roads and everything. If you're not able to see, I'll just scroll it above. See, these are the people building up roads, and they get labor in return. Now we talk about occupations, other occupations in marketplaces. The tribal people were cheated by the traders who looked for huge profit. So what usually happens is if I have ample of gathered fruits, right? So these ample of gathered fruits, actually, I did not pay money to gather them, but I did a lot of hard work in order to gather them. So now these traders did not recognize hard work as such. What they did was they bought these loads of fruits and flowers for very low prices. And that is where the exploitation basically happened. So the tribal groups considered the traders and money lenders as their enemies because they did not give a fair price to whatever their hard work was. And hence they started calling them as the Dikus, which means you can call it similar to the term of Dakus. Dakus are the ones who lootte hain, correct? So they called them Dikus. Now, what are herders? Herders are, we also call them as Banjaras. They move from one place to other. They have a lot of cattle. They have a lot of animals for pasturing. And so they are in one area. वहाँ का pasture जब खत्म होता है, वहाँ का घास जब खत्म, pasture is nothing but घास. वहाँ की घास जब खत्म हो जाती है, they move to another land along with their families, along with their entire community, they move. And that is why they are called as Banjaras or Van Gujjars or Labadis, Lamanis, whatever. They could be cattle herders, goat herders, whatever. The Gaddis of Kullu were shepherds. Shepherds means having a lot of goats. Bakarwals of Kashmir reared goats. Bakri is goat, right? So Bakarwal of Kashmir rear goats. Then slowly and steadily they moved to a culture of settled farming. Now, every time moving, slashing, and burning, everybody did not agree or did not want to do that. So, what they did once they found a water source and a fertile land, they started settling in that. Now, how about when the fertility of the land decreases? They use artificial methods to fertilize the land. And the other thing that they did was crop rotation. So, this year I have chana in my field. Next year I will have some other um, crop which does not need the same nutrients as the chana needs. So this is how they rotated the crops, thus ensuring that it is having a continuous fertility supply. Then we come to Mundas. Now they play an important role in today's lesson. The Mundas of Chota Nagpur, which is the Madhya Pradesh, nearby Madhya Pradesh area, belong to a clan as a whole. All the members of the clan were regarded as descendants of the original settlers who had first cleared the land. So ये from ages to ages, from generations to generations, they have been living in that particular area, and hence their main area was regarded as Chota. Therefore, all of them had the rights on the land. Now, ये उनके बाप दादाओं से चली आ रही जमीन है. From generations, they have been, staying on that. And so everybody had equal rights on that particular zameen. Very often, some people within the clan acquired more land than the others. और जिनके पास ज्यादा लैंड हो गई वो वहां का चीफ कहलाया गया. ठीक है. देयर वर सम पावरफुल मैन. व्हाट दे डिड, दे रेंटेड द लैंड. तो मुझे मेहनत नहीं करनी है, मेरे पास बहुत ज्यादा लैंड है, आई कैन नॉट कल्टिवेट एवरीथिंग एट वंस. What I did, I appointed some laborers on my land in order to carry out the cultivation. So they are not cultivating themselves, they are renting out the land to somebody else for cultivation. That is called as renting out land. Okay, moving ahead. Then settled farmers. So British, now we come to British officials. They observed that Gond and Santals are more civilized than hunter or gatherers or shifting cultivators. Now, if you are staying at one place for a long time and you're not gathering, you tend to get more civilized, is what the British officials thought about. So they are more civilized because they are settled. Now, what is civilized? Civilized means more cultured, more disciplined, um, more sane, or more understanding in their particular attitude. This is a lovely story about Warrior Elvin. If you're interested, you can go through these slides. I am currently, it's not related to your lesson, and so currently I am ignoring these slides. And we also have a calendar of the Baika tribals, which cultivation happens at what time, which uh, time of the year, what they do. So you can refer these slides. These are wonderful slides to refer. Then we come to the main focus of our chapter. How did the colonial rule affect the tribal lives? So the tribal lives were largely affected by the colonial rule, or rather, the colonial rule had a lot of impact on the tribal lives. So what happened? So what are we going to look here? What happened with the tribal chiefs? I told you the chiefs were the people who had a larger influence, who had a larger land. They were considered as the chiefs. So chief क्या करते थे? They used to influence the people of their clan, of their tribe. ठीक है? There are disputes. The chief was supposed to solve the disputes, or probably there is unrest among the people, there is disturbance among the people. The chief was supposed to solve all these issues. But then the conditions of the tribals really changed once the colonial rule started. Okay, the shifting cultivators, the fate is the nasib, or of the shifting cultivators changed to a larger extent. Forest laws changed, the impact, the problems they had, how unemployment rose, and how then lastly the tribals had to rebel against the colonial rule. This is all we are going to see in the coming slides. So, tribal chieftains losing their position. Now, before colonial rule, what used to happen? The tribal chieftains had economic and administrative powers. They were the decision makers. They were able to take wise and good decisions for their particular tribe, their particular clan. So, if the chieftain is from that particular clan, he knew the welfare of the clan, correct? And he always gave decisions based on the welfare of everybody. So it was more of having their own police force. The chief had his own police force acting against whatever evil, uh, men or people or ideas are coming out of their clan. However, under the British rule, what happened? The chieftains could not have their titles and could not rent out land. So this particular power of the chieftain was taken away from the British. They said you cannot have your titles, you cannot be called as the chieftain, and you cannot rent out lands, you cannot have your administrative power. So if we feel something is right, only then something is right. If we feel something is wrong, then it is wrong. This is how the colonials or the British officials started treating them. They were asked to pay tributes. Now the chieftain earlier did not pay tributes, sorry, but now they were asked to pay tributes. Then they could not have their own discipline. They had to follow the rules that the British had laid down. And so what happened? The chieftain lost all the authorities that they earlier had. They could not do their traditional functions. So traditions also were interrupted or changed by the British governors. Now reasons: the settled peasants were easier to control. Now why the chieftains why the British behaved this way? Because the settled peasants were easier to control and administrator than the people who were always on the move. क्योंकि ये जो जूम कल्टीवेटर्स थे, शिफ्टिंग कल्टीवेटर्स थे, वो एक आज यहाँ है तो साल भर बाद कहीं और है. So it is very difficult for them to have a direct control over them. However, the settled people were there for ages together, for generations together, and hence it was easier for them to control them. So what they introduced? They introduced land settlements, that is, they measured the land, defined the rights of each individual to the land, and fixed the revenue from the demand of the state. जितना land जिसके पास है, उतना revenue उसने देना चाहिए. Some peasants were declared landowners, others were declared as tenants. So the people who had a very small amount of land, they were declared as tenants. The people who had bigger amount of land, who are going to give a lot of revenue to the British officers, they were declared as the landowners. And hence, what eventually started happening was the equality among the people was lost. So some started treating them as themselves as landowners, some started treating them as mere laborers, which was not the case before the colonial rule. Hope you're clearly understanding what I am saying. The British took efforts to settle Jum cultivators, but these efforts were not very successful. So, as I told you, that it was easier for the British to control a settled clan and very difficult for them to control a clan which is not settled. So, the first and foremost effort that the British officers did was to settle down the Jum cultivators. But the kind of work the Jum cultivators did, they were herders, they were gatherers, they were shifting cultivators, and so it was very difficult for them to stick to one place or settle down in one place. And that is why this was absolutely not successful. The Jum cultivators in the northeast India insisted on cultivating their traditional practice. So most of the tribals insisted that we are going to continue with our traditional practices. You cannot interfere into our traditional practices. Okay. And in some part of the northeast, the British had to permit them for doing gum cultivation. So somewhere in the northeast, the Britishers could not force settled cultivations and had to actually give permission for them for doing gum cultivation. Moving to the next slide, forest laws and the tribals. Now, we saw about Jum cultivators that some were forced to have settled cultivations, but some did not budge, and some said no, we had to move from one place to other, and we had to do it, and that is how it was allowed by the British officials. So forcefully, it was allowed. It was not very pleasantly or happily allowed. Now, what happened to the tribals who were gatherers and hunters, who lived in the forest? So, in the forest, people were not allowed to move freely. Practicing Jum cultivation, collecting fruits, or hunting animals was not allowed. ठीक है? So what happened? Then they put a lot of strict rules. You cannot cut trees. You cannot. They declared some areas as reserved forest where you cannot enter, where you cannot live. They had to clear that area where they lived, and it was declared as a reserved area. So then this also was started interfering. So, British officers actually stopped the tribal people from remaining inside the forest. The forest department could not get its labor to cut it. So, ultimately, what happened? They cleared the forest area. They asked all the people to move out from the area that they're living and move out to somewhere else because forests are now reserved by the British officers. It's now a property of the British officers. But later, as a result, what happened is British officials could not get enough labor. Now they had moved the people out from the nearby areas, but when the British officials had to clear the forest for laying railway lines or whatever their task was, or maybe setting up an office or something. They could not find labor now because they had moved away the people. So now what they decided to do, they gave Zoom cultivators a small land in that particular reserved area, okay, which allowed them to cultivate in that particular area. And in return, they asked them to look after the forest. And they also started asking them for labor favors. So what they did was they asked them, आप यहाँ रह सकते हो, आप यहाँ पे cultivation कर सकते हो, though it's a reserve forest, but in return, the people living there and doing the jhum cultivation had to provide labor to the British officers. It's indeed very mean. It's indeed a very smart uh, step they took, but then they had to agree. Okay, so this is a small poetry that we have from those ages, quoted by Varian Elver and Shamrao Hivade, songs of Michael. So Michael is a tribe, and they had written songs to tell them how difficult it is to survive in the British era. So in this land of English, how hard it is to live, how hard it is to live. In the village sits the landlord, in the gate sits the kotwar. In the garden sits the patwari, in the field sits the government. So everywhere we have officials to interfere with. In the land of this English, how hard it is to live. To pay cattle tax, we have to sell cow. To pay forest tax, we have to sell buffalo. To pay tax, we have to sell bullock. How are we getting our food in this land of English? So very difficult scenario. So they are saying in order to pay taxes, we had to sell our cattle, and if we sold our cattle, there was no income source or revenue source for us, and ultimately we did not have anything to eat. Okay, now this cocoon problem is a very big problem that was faced. In Hazaribagh in Jharkhand, the Senthils, it's a tribe again, red cocoons. What is cocoon? A silkworm cocoon. Okay, the silk traders and their agents gave loan to the tribal people and collected these cocoons. So, if you remember how silk is made, so the silkworm prepares a cocoon around itself. This cocoon is boiled, and silk is made out of that cocoon. So these cocoons are very, very expensive and very, very precious for making the silk. So what happened? The growers were paid 3 to 4 rupees for 1,000 cocoons, but they were sold at 5 times the price of the cocoon. So here again, exploitation happened. You're buying the cocoons at a very, 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 very low rate, but while selling it, you're selling it 5 times the actual rate. So the middleman, the dealers between the exporters and silk growers made actual huge profit. Whereas the people who are actually doing a lot of hard work could not earn a lot of profit. The silk growers earned very little, and hence, understandably, they were exploited. Then the tribals started becoming homeless. Tribals were recruited in large numbers to work in tea plantations of Assam and coal mines of Jharkhand. So I told you they were treated as laborers. The people who did not have were cleared from the forest were called back and employed as laborers. They were recruited through contractors who paid them miserably low. So they were not paid very well. Now, why were they recruited as laborers? Because they were the ones who are used to doing a lot of hard work, and hence they were recruited as laborers, but were paid miserably low, extremely low in exchange of what they um, what the work they did. Okay, so what were the consequences? To be in short, uh, the consequences of the colonial. Now, people will not bear this for a long time, right? Somebody from somewhere is going to raise their voice and talk against all this wrongdoings of the colonial rule. So, what happened? The Kols started rebelling in 1831 to 32. The Santhals started rebelling from 1855. The Bastars started rebelling in the 1910. And the Varli revolt in Maharashtra started in the 1940. And across this, there was a lot of rebellion by the other tribals like the Birsa Munda and stuff. Moving ahead, we will take a closer look at the Mundas. Now, here is where our hero comes, Birsa Munda. Birsa Munda was belonging to a tribe called Munda, which inhabited in Jharkhand. Although they are well spread in all the states of Bengal, Chhattisgarh, Orissa, the Munda generally means the headman of the village or the head of the village. Okay, the Munda tribe worship the sun god. Okay, Christianity is mainly followed among the Mundas. Now, there is a story where Birsa Munda, their chief, was forced to convert to Christianity in order to seek education and other benefits that only the Christians would receive. So, here is Birsa Munda, our hero of the lesson. He was born on 15th November 1875 at Ulijhatu in Bengal Presidency, now in Kunti district of Jharkhand. Birsa Munda died in jail on 9th June 1900. So he was short-lived, did not live long. Um, he is the one actually who gathered the people together and helped them revolt against the unjust laws of the British. He was then regarded as a god where he asked the people to come together. And he is the one who ignited the freedom struggle in between the people. He led a revolt of the tribes against the British for their ill treatment and the harsh forest laws. So he is the one who actually raised a voice against them and asked the people to come together, and everybody raised a voice against them. Birsa wanted people to once again work on, settle down, and cultivate their fields and give up the black magic or superstitions that they believe. So he overall helped everybody in having a um, revolt against the British rule. Okay, so this slide is very, very interesting. The Birsa Munda Education and Mission School and his association with Vaishnavites. Vaishnavites are the people who worship Vishnu, and he understood that we as tribals were being ill treated, and we had to make some revolt against it. And while doing so, he was caught by the British. He was put into jail, and then in 1900 he died of cholera in prison itself, which means the facilities in the prisons, the hygiene and health in the prison was also not very, very good. This tells us. But however, uh, all this revolt was triumphant, which means they won against the British Empire and they could express their anger, and the tribals could get their um, rights back. Okay, so further, we have a few more slides. You can go through these slides. So, this was all about the lesson of how tribals had to struggle and fight back for their rights during the colonial rule. That's it for today's lecture. We'll see you with the next chapter in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye.